Now it's my pleasure to turn to Wandile. Wandile, you are most welcome. We are very excited to have your presentation as well. So the floor is yours.
Firstly, I would like to speak a little bit about some of the non-trade issues, which I think that if we're thinking about agriculture in a form of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, without addressing these, we're really not going to be able to see a good benefit for many countries and also just entirely a number of farmers across the continent. And this builds up to the point that Jane was articulating, just speaking about, firstly, the employment opportunities that do lie on the sector, which also makes it really very important for any other countries. I mean, if you think about us here in South Africa, we're also thinking about agriculture more importantly because of those employment opportunities that do lie on the sector. But also for the role agriculture play on a number of these economies. I mean, if you look on average, for example, roughly about 23% or so in the continent of the economies is really coming up from the agricultural sector. There are obviously some useful examples or progress studies there in some of the other countries. Rwanda is doing some bit of work on making sure that there is good land administration and followed up with tradable long-term leases, and that we've seen it sparking on some bit of a increasing productivity in their agricultural sector. And rural parts of India also carry some of the examples that we can also emulate on bringing on across a number of countries. Even here in South Africa, while we seem to be excelling at agriculture at a macro level, when you look at the countryside of South Africa, particularly the former homelands, we have similar challenges that you do find in a number of countries in as far as this land governance issue. And I think that needs to be addressed in order to boost productivity. And I think with the continent, that needs to be followed up with also investments on the biological side. There are tough regulations in as far as, for example, you think about the genetically modified seeds in the African continent. And I do think that we need really to look at science and have a greater appreciation of some of the gains that we could gain from there. And there are a lot of examples to see where countries have actually been open to some of these technologies. Now, with opening up the Continental Free Trade Agreement, there's a lot, obviously, that we can put out to the continent from our benefit, but also the continent can take advantage of South Africa. Because every year, South Africa spends roughly $6.2 billion importing some of the agriculture products, raw and processed. And some of these products are stuff that can be produced in the African continent, which I think that some of the fellow Africans should really be looking at South Africa and saying, what is it that South Africa is bringing from South America, from the Black Sea, from all of these countries, and how do they begin to participate? Therefore, when trade picks up, we will be able to have some products to move amongst ourselves, both at a raw material side, but also in the agro-processing side. And I do think that this is the right time in a sense that we are all now looking at areas of saying, where can we get growth? Where can we get jobs for many of people across the continent? And I'm speaking this largely from experience that we've seen also in South Africa, where we started embracing these in 2001, these new technologies on the biological side. Thank you, Prof. And the colleagues for those questions. On the first one, really what I can say there, I mean, South Africa adopted the genetically modified crops and set up its policies in 2001 to 2002. And since then, I mean, on a health perspective, what the South African authorities have been able to monitor throughout those years is not really in line with the public hysteria that you're describing that is usually out there, which is why we have continued to produce those crops. But also to the point of the productivity and also then those gains on a harvest on lowering the cost of food in South Africa. Food price inflation in South Africa is at a comfortable level, even though we have millions still going to bed hungry. It's an aspect of other issues rather than the food side. So I think that the African continent can really look into that and try to emulate. And as a closing onto this particular point, it's if you look at countries, Kenya, and a number of them that are against the adoption of genetically modified crops. when push comes to shove, when they have droughts and locusts and the stuff, they end up importing the very same stuff that they don't want to grow in there. And by virtue of that, then it does disadvantage the local farmers. Obviously, there are some nuances that have to do with the IP of the seeds and the stuff, which many people tend to raise. And I do think that they need to elevate those points rather than just shutting the door from all of this productivity. And at the end, it disadvantages the farmers and the consumers. And the last point about how can the former homelands of South Africa benefit, there's a lot of work that is already being done now. Nimrod is also part of some on the agro-processing and on agriculture, what we call in South Africa agricultural master plans. And the hope for these is really to revitalize those areas. And that's also the space where we have potential to grow the pie in South Africa. So there is a real push to go into those areas and work underway. Thank you.